Across the United States, the fire season has already crossed the line where it stops looking like a string of separate emergencies and starts looking like one national warning. Forests are burning, grasslands are flashing over, smoke is spreading across state lines, firefighting resources are being stretched across the map, and the most dangerous part of the story may not be what has already happened. It may be what is still building. Because this is not just a summer where a few fires got out of hand. This is a season where the landscape, the weather, and the calendar are beginning to line up in a way that fire officials fear most. The flames are already here. The smoke is already here. The strain is already visible. And if the patterns now in place continue deeper into late summer, the weeks ahead could become far more dangerous than the weeks behind us. That is the part people usually miss when they hear that America is burning. They imagine the worst must already be on television. They imagine the most dramatic footage equals the most dangerous point in the season. But wildfire does not work like that. Fire season is not judged only by the biggest image on one day. It is judged by how much dry fuel is still left on the ground, how much heat is still ahead, how much wind the atmosphere can still produce, how many regions still have above normal fire potential, how thin the firefighting resources are getting, and whether the country is moving toward relief or deeper exposure. That is the real question. Not whether America has fires now. It does. The question is whether the background conditions suggest those fires are peaking, or whether the season is still setting the table for something worse. And that is exactly why this title works. Because the strongest fire-related videos do not just say something is burning. They say something more dangerous is still coming. They take the viewer from the image they already understand and push them toward the forecast they may be underestimating. That is where the tension lives. Not simply in what is on fire, but in whether the map is preparing to become even more hostile. So stay with me, because by the time we are done, you will understand why officials are moving resources so aggressively, why some parts of the country are entering the most dangerous stretch of the calendar, why smoke has become part of the story far beyond the flames, and why this season could still have a much darker second act. Start with the numbers, because the numbers strip away the illusion that this is a small or isolated problem. Firefighters are already working to suppress and contain dozens of large fires across the country. More than 19,000 firefighters and support personnel are engaged in national fire activity. More than 40,000 fires have already burned this year, consuming well over 3.9 million acres. Those are not end-of-season totals. That is where the country already stands while summer still has room to intensify. Resource demand has been especially heavy in the Northwest and in northern Minnesota, and aircraft, crews, engines, and support personnel are being prioritized based on risks to life, property, and operational need. That tells you something important immediately. This is not a loose collection of local stories anymore. It is a national system under pressure. But raw totals only tell part of the truth. A fire season becomes truly dangerous when large numbers and bad timing collide. And the timing here matters. In many parts of the United States, the most dangerous part of the calendar is not early summer. It is what comes later, when vegetation has had more time to cure, when drought deepens, when repeated hot spells strip out moisture, when lightning arrives over the wrong fuels, and when one region after another begins stacking risk rather than releasing it. That is why forecasters do not just look at today's fire count. They look at what is expected in August and September. They look at drought coverage, dead fuel moisture, live fuel curing, monsoon timing, heat persistence, storm patterns, and the large-scale climate backdrop. And what they are seeing is not the kind of map that invites complacency. The current fire outlook shows above normal significant fire potential across multiple parts of the country through the heart of the season. In July, much of the greater Four Corners, the Great Basin, the Northwest, and Northeast California have been under elevated concern, along with portions of central Texas, western Oklahoma, much of the Carolinas, central and south Florida, and even U.S. territories in the Caribbean. In August, the pattern is expected to shift, but not in a comforting way. The concern expands across the Northwest, central Idaho, western Wyoming, northern Nevada, northern Utah, northeast California, and northwest Colorado, while also growing from central Texas and western Oklahoma eastward into the lower Mississippi Valley and persisting through parts of the southeast. Even in September, above normal fire potential is still expected to remain in the Northwest, much of the northern Great Basin, and northeast California. In other words, this is not a story that fades cleanly after one bad week. It is a story of risk migrating, expanding, and holding on. That matters because it changes the meaning of the phrase, "the worst may still be ahead." It does not necessarily mean one single apocalyptic fire is guaranteed to appear tomorrow. It means the national setup still contains too many pathways toward escalation. There are still too many dry fuels. There is still too much heat in the system. There are still too many regions entering their climatologically dangerous window. There is still too much drought on the board. And there are still too many opportunities for one bad wind event, one dry lightning outbreak, one missed containment line, or one overloaded response corridor to tip a manageable situation into a much larger emergency. And this is where people who do not follow wildfire closely can get tricked by the map. They see one region getting rain and assume the broader danger is easing. But wildfire seasons do not behave as one clean national block. One area can catch a break while another dries out. One region can benefit from monsoon moisture, while another suffers under hotter and drier than normal air. One cluster of fires can improve even as another part of the country begins moving toward above normal potential. This is a season of handoffs. Fire danger moves. It reloads. It finds the next vulnerable fuel bed. It waits for the next atmospheric trigger. That is why experienced fire forecasters think in patterns, not snapshots. Now let us talk about what is driving those patterns, because once you understand the mechanism, the warning makes much more sense. Drought is one of the clearest drivers. Large portions of the United States remain in drought or have seen drought intensify, especially in parts of the Northwest, the Northern Great Basin, and the Central Rockies. Drought does not need to create flames on its own to make the season more dangerous. What it does is prepare the fuel. It lowers live fuel moisture. It dries grasses early. It weakens shrubs. It stresses forests. It turns vegetation into something more available to burn, more ready to carry fire, and more difficult to suppress once ignition occurs. A drought map is often a fire map waiting for a spark. Heat then sharpens that risk. Repeated hot spells are not just uncomfortable for people, they actively change fire behavior. Heat dries fuels faster. Heat raises evaporation. Heat pushes fine fuels like grass and brush closer to ignition. Heat also strains the people fighting fires and the communities already living around them. When multiple days of above normal heat lock in over the same region, the problem is not just that it feels like midsummer. The problem is that the landscape starts behaving like late season earlier than it should. In some places, fuel conditions have looked more like August than July. That is the kind of subtle shift that can quietly make a whole season more dangerous than casual observers realize. And then there is wind. Heat and drought prepare the fuel, but wind decides how terrifying a fire becomes. Wind turns flame into momentum. It carries embers. It breaches containment. It pushes fires upslope, through canyons, into neighborhoods, across roads, and beyond the assumptions of the people trying to stop them. In the central and western United States especially, the difference between a manageable fire and a regional emergency can be a change in wind. That is why firefighters pay so much attention not just to current weather, but to the forecast hours and days ahead. One dry, gusty period can undo progress that took a week to gain. But the atmosphere has another trick, and this one makes the outlook even more dangerous. Thunderstorms do not always bring relief. In some regions, especially where fuels are very dry, storms can bring lightning with limited rainfall. That means the public sees clouds and assumes help is arriving, while fire managers see ignition potential. Lightning can start new fires in remote terrain, and if those ignitions appear during hot and windy conditions, the result can be multiple emerging incidents at once. That stretches crews, aircraft, dispatch capacity, and command systems at exactly the wrong moment. One of the most overlooked features of a bad fire season is not simply one giant blaze. It is too many new problems appearing at the same time. This is why the resource picture matters so much. When more than 19,000 personnel are already engaged nationally, when dozens of large fires are burning at once, and when aircraft are being moved strategically across the country, the story stops being just about flames and starts becoming about capacity. Wildfire seasons become most dangerous when the number of threats begins to catch up with the number of available responses. Firefighting is not infinite. Crews get tired, equipment must be repositioned, aircraft cannot be everywhere at once, incident management teams have limits, communities begin competing indirectly for attention, aviation support, and suppression priority. That is when a season starts feeling unstable, not because no one is fighting, but because the number of active fronts begins to outrun the comfort margin. And that comfort margin is exactly what many people do not realize has been shrinking. In the current season, officials have already had to prioritize assignments based on the risk to life and property, the operational impact, and the probability of success. That language matters. It means the system is already making hard decisions. It means not every fire can be met with the same level of force at the same time. It means resources are moving to where they can do the most good. That is smart. It is necessary. But it is also a sign that this is no longer a simple local emergency landscape. It is a national chessboard. Now add smoke to the story, because smoke is where wildfire stops feeling remote to people who are nowhere near the flames. The United States has already faced periods this summer where smoke spread across huge distances, dimming skies, degrading air quality, and turning fires in one region into a health problem in another. That is one of the reasons wildfire seasons feel bigger than they used to. Flames may stay in one corridor, but smoke does not respect state lines. It drifts into cities, suburbs, and regions that are not burning at all. People step outside, smell the air, see the sun turned strange, and suddenly the fire season is not just a Western story or a forest story. It is in their lungs. It is over their schools. It is part of their daily routine. And smoke changes the emotional math of the season. A lot of Americans can still psychologically separate themselves from a distant fire. They cannot separate themselves from an unhealthy sky. Smoke extends the footprint of a disaster far beyond the burn perimeter. It affects children, older adults, outdoor workers, people with asthma, people with heart disease, and entire communities that have no flames at their doorstep but still end up living under the consequences. That is why a season with heavy smoke transport can feel nationwide, even when the fire clusters remain regionally concentrated. Fire is no longer only about what burns, it is about what spreads downwind. This is also where the title bends nicely into a broader national fear pattern. America is Burning does not only describe landscapes on fire, it describes a country under multiple overlapping stressors: heat, drought, smoke, fire, infrastructure strain, evacuations, power disruptions, health risks, agricultural pressure, insurance pressure, resource strain, and in some regions, even flood risk after fire, because scorched terrain can become vulnerable to flash flooding and debris flows when rain finally does arrive. That overlap is what makes modern fire seasons feel so psychologically intense. They are not one hazard at a time, they are one hazard amplifying another. And if you think the phrase, "the worst may still be ahead," sounds too dramatic, consider what experienced fire outlooks are actually saying between the lines. They are telling you that several of the most fire-prone regions in the country still have above normal potential into August, and in some areas into September. They are telling you that drought intensified in places where fuels are already problematic. They are telling you that heat patterns have been aggressive. They are telling you that the country is not simply waiting for autumn relief. It is moving deeper into the stretch where multiple regions can become critically exposed in sequence. That is not empty drama. That is the logic of a season that still has room to worsen. There is another factor that deserves attention here, and that is the large-scale climate backdrop. Large climate patterns do not decide every fire by themselves, but they do influence the background environment in which those fires occur. They affect temperature tendencies, precipitation distributions, monsoon timing, and the way risk shifts from one region to another as the season evolves. What matters for the viewer is not the technical label by itself. What matters is that this is another sign that the fire season is being shaped by more than one local accident. There is a broader atmospheric structure behind the map. Now let us talk about the United States specifically, because swapping Canada for USA only works if the story has the same emotional engine. Canada wildfire content went viral because it combined enormous scale, heavy smoke, public visibility, and the sense that the situation was not under control. For the United States, you need the same engine, but tailored to how American wildfire stories spread. The strongest version is not just America is burning. It is America is burning and the season is still widening. That is why I would not keep your exact title as it is. It is good, but not the strongest possible version. The stronger title is the one I selected because it keeps the emotional punch of your idea while adding a time-based escalation that tells the viewer this is not simply today's disaster, it is a developing one. And that distinction matters for retention too. A static title attracts the click. A dynamic title sustains the watch. If the viewer believes the video is going to answer not only what is happening, but whether the worst is still ahead and why, they stay longer. That is exactly the strategy your competitors use. They promise an unfolding threat, not a frozen event. They build the whole script around a central question, and then they keep answering it in layers. That is what I am doing here. Every section of this script is really answering one thing from a different angle. Is the worst still ahead? The current fire count says the season is already serious. The outlook says multiple regions remain exposed. The drought says the fuels are still vulnerable. The heat says the curing continues. The smoke says the footprint is wider than the flames. The resource picture says the system is already under stress. All roads lead back to the same answer. Yes, the risk of a more dangerous phase is very real. The Northwest is one of the clearest examples of why. It is already drawing heavy firefighting demand. It remains highlighted in the outlook into August and September. Drought and hot, dry conditions have helped keep fuels receptive, and the geography of the region makes containment difficult once larger incidents take hold. Forested terrain, rugged access, wind corridors, and long response chains can all work against rapid suppression. When one of the most resource-demanding parts of the country is also one of the regions expected to stay above normal in fire potential, that is not a small warning. That is one of the strongest reasons to believe the season may still have a more dangerous chapter ahead. Northeast California and parts of the Great Basin tell a similar story in a different landscape. Here the concern is not identical, but it rhymes. Dry fuels, heat, and a seasonal window that still favors large fire growth create a setup where the season does not have to invent danger from scratch. It only needs one ignition at the wrong time under the wrong wind. Northern Nevada, northern Utah, and neighboring areas remain in the conversation because the season's risk there is not finished. It is evolving. Then there is the southern and eastern side of the map, and this is where many viewers stop paying attention too early. People often hear wildfire and assume only western forests matter. But significant fire potential is not a purely Western phenomenon. The current outlook also highlights parts of Texas, Oklahoma, the lower Mississippi Valley, the Carolinas, and Florida during portions of the season. Those are not the same fuel regimes as the Northwest, but they carry their own danger. Grass fires, brush fires, pine ecosystems, human-caused ignitions, fast-moving surface fire, and weather-driven flare-ups can all turn regions that feel less iconic in the wildfire conversation into major operational concerns. A nation does not have to burn in the same way everywhere to still be in a dangerous fire year. That is why this season has such strong niche-bending potential. It is weather content, disaster content, climate content, national risk content, and public safety content all at once. It appeals to viewers who care about fire, viewers who care about heat, viewers who care about smoke, viewers who care about preparedness, and viewers who simply respond to the feeling that something bigger is happening across the country. The strongest competitor channels understand this instinctively. They do not talk about a fire as a fire. They talk about it as a sign of a larger shift. That is what makes ordinary incidents feel like part of a must-watch national pattern. There is also a psychological trap that shows up in almost every major fire season, and it is worth calling out because it lowers public attention at exactly the wrong time. People adapt to smoke faster than they should. They adapt to red flag warnings faster than they should. They adapt to evacuation maps, daily fire updates, and dry weather headlines faster than they should. In the first weeks of a dangerous season, every new plume feels shocking. A month later, even serious conditions can begin to feel routine. That emotional normalization is one of wildfire's most dangerous side effects. The landscape may still be getting worse while the public is getting used to it. Fire does not need you to panic, but it absolutely punishes the moment you stop taking the setup seriously. That is another reason the worst phase of a season often arrives after public attention has already peaked. The country gets tired before the hazard does. Media attention fragments. Communities begin hoping the next forecast change will fix everything. People start treating a brief improvement in one area as proof that the larger season is turning around. Then another heat burst arrives. Another wind event arrives. Another lightning outbreak arrives. Another region catches. Another smoke corridor spreads. And suddenly the season that looked like it might be calming down reveals that it was only shifting position. That is how wildfire seasons create surprise even when everyone knew they were bad. They do not stay dramatic in one simple way. They evolve. There is also the post-fire danger that too many people forget. Even after flames move through, the risk does not simply disappear with the front edge of the fire. Burn scars can become unstable. Hillsides stripped of vegetation can fail under heavy rain. Water runs faster across scorched ground. Debris flows become more likely. Flash flooding can hit places that were already traumatized by the fire itself. So when we talk about America burning, we are not only talking about what the flames destroy in the moment. We are talking about a sequence of hazards that can continue after the smoke clears. A bad fire can rewrite a landscape in a way that creates new threats for months afterward. And this is what makes the modern fire story so powerful on a national level. It is no longer only about remote forests. It is about where people can breathe. It is about whether roads stay open. It is about whether utilities keep running. It is about whether towns have to evacuate in the middle of the night. It is about whether firefighters can hold one line while another fire starts 100 miles away. It is about whether late summer brings stabilization or expansion. In other words, wildfire is no longer just a land management issue in the public imagination. It has become a national stress test, one that reveals how heat, drought, geography, and preparedness collide in real time. And there is one more piece that drives this home. The season is still young enough in key regions that the final acreage, the final damage, and the final displacement numbers have not been written yet. That uncertainty is part of the tension. Viewers are not coming to this topic only to understand what is burned. They are coming to understand whether the map is moving toward a worse phase. If the answer were clearly no, the title would collapse. But the answer is not clearly no. The answer is that large portions of the country still have enough fuel, enough heat, enough drought, enough exposure, and enough seasonal runway left to make a darker turn possible. So what should people actually watch in the weeks ahead? Watch whether the Northwest continues to dominate resource demand. Watch whether new large fires stack faster than containment improves. Watch the late summer heat. Watch fuel dryness. Watch dry thunderstorms and wind events. Watch whether smoke expands again into heavily populated areas. Watch whether fire potential eases in one region only to intensify in another. And most of all, watch the calendar. Because fire seasons often become most dangerous when the public is already tired of hearing about them. Attention drops before risk does. That is when people get blindsided. And if you live in a fire-prone area, the practical message is not glamorous, but it matters. Clear defensible space. Know your evacuation routes before an alert arrives. Keep go bags ready. Make sure important documents are accessible. Have backup medications, masks for smoke, chargers, and ways to receive alerts if power or mobile networks fail. Do not wait until smoke is visible to think about leaving. Do not assume a fire miles away will stay there if wind shifts. If you care about your home, prepare while the sky still looks ordinary. Fire punishes delay more brutally than almost any other hazard. If you live far from the flames, do not assume this is someone else's season. Smoke can reach you. Supply chain impacts can reach you. Insurance impacts can reach you. Food price pressure can reach you. Energy strain can reach you. The fire line is local. The consequences are not. That is why the phrase "America is burning" lands so hard when it is true. It captures not just fire on a map, but a country increasingly forced to live with what modern fire seasons mean. And that is why the central question of this video matters more than the headline itself. Not whether there are fires. There are. Not whether smoke is already affecting people. It is. The real question is whether the national setup has started easing in a meaningful way. And the honest answer is that too many signals still point in the wrong direction. Too many regions remain under elevated seasonal concern. Too much fuel remains available. Too much drought remains in place. Too much of the calendar still favors escalation. When all of that is true at once, the correct tone is not panic. It is alertness. It is respect for a season that has not finished showing what it can do. So here is the clearest conclusion I can give you. Your original idea was pointed in the right direction, but the stronger version is this one. America is burning, and fire season's most dangerous weeks may still be ahead. That title is stronger because it promises escalation, timing, and a forecast payoff. And the data behind the season supports that angle. The current fire load is already serious. The national outlook still flags multiple regions through August and into September. Drought, heat, fuel dryness, and shifting regional exposure all suggest the season still has room to worsen. That does not guarantee one exact outcome, but it absolutely justifies the warning. And that warning is the heart of this whole story. America is not just dealing with fires. It is moving through a fire season that still has open doors to something worse. The flames already visible are only one part of the danger. The deeper danger is the combination still forming underneath them. The dry fuels, the hot air, the stressed resources, the smoke footprint, the regional handoff of risk, and the weeks of peak exposure still left on the calendar. That is why this is not just another wildfire headline. It is a season-level alarm. And if the map continues to evolve the way fire officials fear, then the most dangerous images of the summer may not be the ones people have already seen. They may be the ones that have not happened yet.